World of Warfare presents
The Battle of Flanders. On October 19, 1914, the German army commenced its Schlieffen Plan, which called for their armies to invade Belgium with an objective of encircling French forces along the Franco-German border in order to win a swift and abbreviated victory over France, before moving east for a planned offensive against Russia on the Eastern Front. At first, German forces pushed back Belgian troops before defeating the British Expeditionary Force, or BEF, at Mons, who in turn halted the German army from advancing on Paris at the First Battle of the Marne, which saw the first use of trench warfare during the First World War. On September 12th, the Allies failed in their attempts to halt the Germans at the Battle of the Aisne, which began the race to the sea as both sides attempted to outflank the other. In late September, French Marshal Joseph Joffre and British Field Marshal John French began discussions about the transfer of the BEF from Aisne to Flanders in an attempt to unify British forces and shorten Britain's line of communication with England, while defending Antwerp and the Channel ports. Joffre eventually agreed to the transfer, provided French forces could make individual British units available for operations as soon as they arrived into the Flanders region of Belgium. Subsequent marches by the BEF were conducted at night, while billeted troops were forbidden to venture outside during daylight hours. Britain's insistence on secrecy proved to be a positive one on October 3rd, when an intercepted German wireless communique confirmed that German High Command still believed that the BEF remained dug in along the Aisne River. Arriving at the ancient Flemish city of Ypres by mid-October, with its fortifications guarding English Channel ports along with access to the North Sea and beyond, on October 19th, the Germans opened their Flanders offensive at Ypres and other nearby villages, while the Allies put up a steadfast resistance. In hindsight, the First Battle of Ypres can be divided into 5 distinct stages, beginning with the first encounter battles from October 19th to the 21st, the Battle of Langemarck from October 21st to the 24th, the battles of La Bassée and Armentières from October 10th through November 2nd, coinciding with Allied offensives at Ypres and the Battle of Gelliveld from October 29th to the 31st, followed by the last big German offensive, culminating in the Battle of Non-Bosschen on November 11th. While both sides of the conflict were armed with weapons of the Industrial Revolution, the defensive firepower of artillery and machine guns made for a bloody, indecisive fight, while the ability of both combatants to resupply themselves and replace casualties prolonged the battle for weeks. Ultimately, however, neither side had moved forces to Flanders fast enough to achieve a victory, leaving all armies involved desperately low on morale. While Germany outnumbered the Allies with a 5.4 million man force, opposed to the Allies' 4.4 million man force, by the end of fighting due to the onset of winter, German casualties stood at 134,315 killed, wounded, or missing, while the Allies saw 139,717 killed, wounded, or missing, making the First Battle of Ypres a bloodbath standoff for both sides of the conflict. In 1914, German chemist Walther Nernst made a proposal to Colonel Max Bauer, a German liaison to non-military scientists, that the German army could empty enemy trenches through the use of tear gas, and after observing tear gas tests under simulated battle conditions, chemist Fritz Haber proposed the use of heavier-than-air chlorine gas to expediently remove opposing forces from entrenched defensive positions. Embracing the idea of chemical warfare, German commander Erich von Falkenhayn gave a green light for the manufacture of 5,730 gas cylinders to be sent to the Ypres salient that formed after the First Battle of Ypres, which was held by the Belgian army at Ypres, with 2 French divisions to the north, while a Canadian division and 2 British divisions defended the east. Comprised of 4 distinct battle actions, the Second Battle of Ypres began around 5 p.m. on April 22nd of 1915, when the German Fourth Army released 171 tons of chlorine gas on a 4-mile front between the hamlets of Langmark and Gravenstoffel. Known as the Battle of Gravenstoffel Ridge, French troops suffered 2,000 to 3,000 casualties from the ensuing gas cloud, with 800 to 1,400 fatalities, leading Colonel Henri Murdac of the 90th Infantry Brigade to note of his troops that their overcoats were thrown off or opened wide, their scarves pulled off, running like madmen, directionless, shouting for water, spitting up blood, some even rolling on the ground, making desperate efforts to breathe. The gas attack left an undefended 4-mile gap in the French line, while the Germans, following well behind the gas cloud and breathing through cotton pads soaked with sodium thiosulfate solution, captured 2,000 French fighters and 51 guns in the villages of Langmark and Pilkem, followed by a second gas attack the following day that decimated the 13th Battalion Royal Highlanders of Canada. Ordered to counterattack and defend the gap caused by both gas attacks, some 800 Canadian and Scottish soldiers attacked in waves of 2 companies each at 11:46 p.m. Charging blind without reconnaissance, the Allies were engaged by small arms fire from a wooded blind, prompting the Allies to engage in a bayonet charge that led to a 75% casualty rate for the Germans. By the end of the Battle of Gravenstoffel, 5,000 Allied troops were killed, with 15,000 wounded. From April 24th through May the 5th, a second engagement became known as the Battle of St. Julian, which had now become the front line after the gas attacks and Allied withdrawals of April 22nd, when on the morning of the 24th, Lance Corporal Frederick Fisher and a handful of men from the 13th Battalion Canadian Expeditionary Force prevented advancing German troops from moving through the village of St. Julian, before the Germans unleashed yet another chlorine gas attack on the reformed Canadian line west of the village. Word was passed to Allied troops to urinate on their handkerchiefs and place them over their nose and mouth, which proved to be insufficient, allowing the Germans to take St. Julian before nightfall. The following day, British troops counterattacked the village, and while they failed to retake St. Julian, they managed to create a new front line closer to the village. On April 26, however, the 4th, 6th, and 7th Battalions of the Northumberland Brigade at first gained a foothold in the village, until they were forced back after suffering 1,954 casualties. Now known as the Battle of Fresenberg, from May 8th to the 13th, the Germans moved their field artillery and 3 Army Corps closer to Fresenberg Ridge, where they decimated Allied trench positions on the forward slope of the ridge, only to be repelled by valorous Allied survivors. During the 3rd German assault on the morning of the 8th, the Allies were pushed back, leaving a 2-mile gap in their defensive line, yet the German advance through the gap was ultimately repelled by counterattacks from the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, followed by a night attack by the 10th Brigade. Of the 700 Canadians involved in the attack, only 150 survived. The last of the engagements that made up the Second Battle of Ypres was the Battle of Bellewaerde, when on May 24th, the Germans unleashed another gas attack at Allied entrenchments in and around a place known as Shelltrap Farm. After Allied troops withdrew from the gas cloud, German forces advanced upon the British line to the north of the primary battalion, only to be repelled by artillery fire and backup support from the 9th Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders. During the nearly month-long Second Battle of Ypres, losses on both sides proved to be egregious, including 34,933 German casualties, as recorded by official historians of the Reich Archive, while Britain recorded casualties of 59,275. By the end of fighting, French casualties stood at an estimated 10,000 killed, wounded, or missing, while the Canadians witnessed an estimated 6,000. And while chemical warfare had first been used against the Russians, the use of chlorine gas and later mustard gas would go on to be used by both combatants during the First World War, while the Second Battle of Ypres opened a dark new window into man's ongoing ruthlessness against each other. After the First and Second Battles of Ypres, which saw German forces attack an Allied-held salient or bulge in the Flanders region near Ypres, Belgium, France witnessed widespread mutinies after the Germans unleashed some 200 tons of chlorine gas into Allied trenches. Beginning on July 31, 1917, some 4 months after America's entry into World War I, British Commander-in-Chief Sir Douglas Haig called for an aggressive offensive against German subbases along the north coast of Belgium, under the mistaken belief that the German army was so weakened after 3 years of fighting that Germany would immediately sue for peace after one more Allied victory. To achieve his objective, Haig amassed 50 British and 6 French divisions under the leadership of Sir Hubert Gough, commencing hostilities with a 3,000-piece artillery assault on German lines near Passchendaele. Both sides witnessed heavy losses in the first 2 days of fighting, at the same time pushing the Germans back by more than a mile, while taking more than 5,000 German prisoners. Bogged down by heavy rains and paralyzing mud, after a month of inconclusive fighting, Haig replaced Gough with Herbert Plummer, which led to several Allied gains in September that gave the Allies high ground control of the Passchendaele Ridge, some 6 miles east of the village of Ypres. Pushing his men without mercy, the third month of the campaign saw heavy fighting and egregious losses, where exhausted Allied soldiers made little notable gain, thanks to German reinforcements released from the Eastern Front after Russia's ability to fight devolved into chaos following Lenin's Bolshevik Revolution, a change of fortune that Haig failed to anticipate in his offensive strategy and war planning. Despite his weakened odds, Haig ordered 3 final assaults on Ypres throughout the month of October, until Canadian and British troops broke through German defenses to capture the now decimated village of Ypres on November 6, 1917. The capture of Ypres gave Haig the justification he needed to call off his offensive, ending the Third Battle of Ypres with some 310,000 Allied casualties, against 260,000 casualties for the Germans, making the Third Ypres campaign one of the deadliest, most controversial offensives of the First World War. Combined with Russia's collapsing war effort caused by the Bolshevik Revolution and the United States' impending entry into World War I, German Army Commander General Erich Ludendorff made one last push for victory against French, Belgian, and British troops along the Western Front, transferring 48 divisions from the Eastern Front to amass a numerical advantage against Allied troops. Intending to punch through the boundary between the British and French armies, with the goal of ending Great Britain's participation in the war. During the early morning hours of March 21, 1918, Germany's spring offensive began with Operation Michael, laying down a withering 5-hour artillery assault before specially trained German units overran Allied positions, capturing 1,926 square miles of land while taking 90,000 prisoners by April 5th, at the same time failing to push the British from the European mainland. Known as the Fourth Battle of Ypres, the Battle of Lys, known as Operation Georgette by the Germans, was fought from April 7th to the 29th, with a goal set by German High Command to capture the now decimated village of Ypres, while yet again attempting to force the British back into the channel ports of Calais, Dunkirk, and Boulogne, and ultimately out of the war. The Germans' initial attack zone epicentered in the Flanders region of Belgium, some 6 miles east of Ypres, and an equal distance east of Bethune, France, where the Allies maintained their frontline positions, with the Belgian army to the north, the British Second Army to the north and center, while the British First Army occupied the south. In a string of 4 hotly contested battles, the Germans' first offensive began on April the 7th with a punishing bombardment along the Allied line between Armentières and Festubert, continuing until dawn on April the 9th, when 8 divisions of the German Sixth Army forced the Portuguese 2nd Division to withdraw toward Esther after hours of heavy fighting. To the south of the Portuguese, the British 55th West Lancashire Division pulled back to a more defensible position and held its ground for the remainder of the battle, while the British 40th Division withdrew to the north during heavy fighting, which drastically reduced their fighting strength. For their part, the Germans advanced 5 miles to Esther along the Lys River, where they were finally halted by British reserve divisions. Fighting on the 10th and the 11th broke out in the Battle of Messines, when 4 divisions of the German Fourth Army attacked north of Armentières against the British 19th Division, driving 2 miles through a 4-mile-long front for the successful capture of the Belgian town of Messines. Now flanked on both sides to the south, the 25th Division withdrew 2 miles in a desperate bid for survival, leading British Field Marshal Douglas Butcher Haig to deliver his famous backs to the wall, death before retreat order that urged all Allied fighters to stand firm against the Germans' withering offensive. The 3-day Battle of Aisne was to follow on April 12th, when the German Sixth Army renewed its attack along the southern front as they closed in on the vital Allied supply center at Aisne, where they advanced 2 miles through the Allied front before capturing Merville. Advancing yet again on the 13th, the German Sixth Army's advance was shut down by the 1st Australian Division, while the British 4th and 5th Divisions successfully defended Hinge Ridge and the Ypres Forest. Coinciding with the Battle of Aisne, from the 13th to the 15th, the Germans captured Bailleul, 8 miles west of Armentières, and while British resistance was stiff, after a series of withering defeats, the order was given to pull back from Passchendaele to Ypres and the Isère Canal. While the Battle of Lys can be considered a partial victory for the Germans, who penetrated Allied lines to a depth of 9 miles, Operation Georgette failed to achieve the Germans' primary objective of capturing Aisne and forcing the British not only from the Ypres salient, but off the European mainland, leading the German High Command to call off the offensive on April 29, after the arrival of French reinforcements further reduced their chances of success. While casualties have been hotly debated among historians for years, in 1937, 3 of Britain's official historians reported an estimated 82,000 casualties on either side. Also known as the Advance in Flanders and the Battle of the Peaks of Flanders, the 5th Battle of Ypres is now known as one of the last 10 battles of the First World War. In advance of the battle, German morale had plummeted as American soldiers poured into the Western Front, giving the Allies a growing numerical advantage over the armies of the German Empire. In an effort to capitalize on the obvious, French Marshal Ferdinand Foch proposed a strategy that became known as the Grand Offensive, calling for attacks on the German line from as many points of attack as humanly possible. As the plan developed, Belgian, French, and British forces around the Ypres salient were tasked with forming a northern pincer toward the Belgian city of Liège, leading to the onset of hostilities on September 28th of 1918. After a 3-hour artillery bombardment, at 5:30 in the morning, 12 Belgian divisions, 10 British divisions, and 6 French divisions attacked a 4.5-mile German front, the British along the Ypres-Zanebeek road, and the Belgians and the French at Dixmude, where they advanced 6 miles to recapture Passchendaele. Despite rain and ever-worsening mud, by nightfall, the British had taken 4 more towns, while Belgian and French forces had captured an additional 4 more. By the 29th, despite an almost stagnating slog through mud, the Allies occupied all of the high ground around Ypres. Capturing Comines on October 1st, the advance was halted on the 2nd when German reinforcements arrived just as the Allies overran their supply lines, forcing 15,000 rations to be airdropped from 80 Belgian and British transport planes. By the end of the battle, the Allies had advanced 18 miles through the German front, capturing 10,000 prisoners, 300 artillery pieces, and 600 machine guns, at a cost of 16,695 Allied soldiers, making the Battle of Flanders one of the longest bloody engagements of the First World War. Written by Canadian physician and soldier Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae during the First World War, In Flanders Fields is a powerful poem composed on May 3, 1915, during the Second Battle of Ypres, after McCrae witnessed the death of his close friend, Lieutenant Alexis Helmer. Succinctly capturing the sorrow, sacrifice, and legacy of fallen warriors, In Flanders Fields remains one of the most famous war poems in world literature, symbolizing the high cost of war while inspiring the tradition of wearing red poppies to honor the fallen. Consisting of 3 stanzas with a simple yet suggestive rhyme scheme of AABBA, AABBA, AABB, the poem evokes a solemn, urgent tone that resonates with both grief and duty, remembrance, sacrifice, and a call to arms for the living. In Flanders Fields the poppies blow, between the crosses row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. The opening line sets the location in the Flanders region of Belgium, where the 3 battles of Ypres took place over the course of the war. The peaceful image of poppies and chirping larks amidst the carnage of war introduces the reader to the grim life and death reality of combat, as well as the persistence of life amidst so much carnage, loss, and destruction. We are the dead, short days ago, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. In the second stanza, the fallen soldiers speak directly to the reader, reminding us that these fallen men once had a life as full as our own, while the past tense use of lived and loved adds emotional weight, forcing the reader to acknowledge the personal and all-encompassing sacrifice of their deaths. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw. The torch be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields. The final stanza of the poem shifts the emphasis from mourning to a direct call to action for the living to continue the fight, which in turn portrays the war as a necessary struggle, while the torch metaphor represents the reader's duty to honor the fallen. For if the living fail to carry on the fight after the sacrifices of the fallen, then the dead will be deprived of their eternal rest. Since its creation, In Flanders Fields and the wearing of a red poppy has become an enduring symbol of remembrance for all war veterans, both the living and the fallen, while the poem is frequently read aloud at memorial services, reminding both the protected and veterans alike about the high cost of war and the responsibility of the living to honor the past.